The State Department informing Congress that it will waive sanctions on Iranian oil so that it can access frozen funds from South Korea and Japan. This will allow the transfer of funds to exporters in those two countries, giving Iran a huge win. This comes on the heels of an exposed plot orchestrated by Iranian operatives to kidnap an Iranian American. This is an author living in Brooklyn. Former Senator and Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Joe Lieberman is the chairman of United Against Nuclear Iran. He joins me right now. Senator, it's always a pleasure to see you. I was thinking about you the other day when I saw this story, because I know how you have been fighting against nuclear Iran for so long. Why is the State Department and Joe Biden waiving sanctions on Iran and their illicit oil trade, while the same day we learn about this Iranian spy network that wants to kidnap an American journalist?
Well, good morning, Maria. I mean, to me, your question is excellent and really answers itself. There's no reason why, at this point, Iran has earned the waiver of oil sanctions against it. I presume the Biden administration is doing it to try to induce Iran to negotiate more openly, more generously at the table in Vienna about a new Iran nuclear agreement. But the administration in Washington ought to look at what the Iranian government is doing on the ground. It continues to really repress its own people. It has continued to sponsor terrorist groups, including the militias in Iraq, to attack American forces in the region. And of course, as you said, it did something not just ordinary, but outrageous. It actually planned to kidnap an American citizen, an Iranian American, because she, a journalist and human rights activist who lives in Brooklyn, New York, was campaigning against the regime in Tehran. I mean, this is, in other circumstances, this might be deemed an act of war. It's certainly a violation of our sovereignty. And I think it's time for the Biden administration to suspend all negotiations with Iran in Vienna about a nuclear deal until Iran obeys the laws, and particularly stops using its own terrorists, government-sponsored terrorists, to attack Americans here in our country and in the Middle East.
I mean, it could not be more clear. You just laid it out. You're talking about this administration waiving sanctions so that this money that's currently frozen, that Iran cannot get access to because it's frozen, now is going to be unfrozen. They're going to get that money to do business with Japan, South Korea. On the same day, we find out about this whole network plan of Iran to kidnap this woman, this journalist in Brooklyn. And there's no issue about it. I mean, they put charges against this Iranian intelligence network, including kidnap, conspiracy, sanctions, violations, conspiracy, bank wire fraud conspiracy, money laundering conspiracy charges. So they're very clear. They understand that what they were doing deserves, accountability. So they put the charges on this network, and yet they allow the government of Iran to access this frozen money. How desperate is this administration to get back in the nuclear Iran deal? I mean, you know Joe Biden, Senator, right? You spent time with him in the Senate. Have you spoken to him? What is this obsession with getting back into the Iran deal?
It is a strange obsession, and it's one that's not based on reality. Of course, it's always worth trying to talk to people who are your antagonists and to see if you can negotiate a better agreement with them. The 2015 nuclear agreement between the U.S. and Iran and some other countries was a bad deal. And in fact, they didn't do, in return for lifting of sanctions that Congress had adopted over the years to force them to stop their nuclear program. They didn't stop their nuclear program. They got billions of dollars. And what they do with it, the same thing they will do with the money that Iran gets for the lifting of these sanctions on the lifting of the waivers, or granting of waivers on oil sanctions, and that is they'll spend it not on their own people, they'll spend it on supporting terrorists. There was an old expression, and it's colloquial. I learned when I started out in Connecticut politics. Somebody said, "Don't spit in my face and tell me it's raining." And the Biden administration may want to believe that it's raining, but in fact, the Iranian government is spitting in the face of America, and it's time that we don't take it anymore until they behave. And that's why I repeat, I appeal to President Biden, stop the negotiations with Iran in Vienna about a nuclear deal. They have not earned those negotiations, and we simply can't trust them.
Right. And, it's the whole national policy coming out of this administration. We're only 6 months in, Joe, and in 6 months, you've got oil prices at $71 a barrel, enriching Iran and enriching Russia. Vladimir Putin's the biggest winner here. We know that. Come on. Look at where oil is in the 6 months that Joe Biden has been in office. You've got Iran getting access to this money that was frozen, even as it spits in our face and tries to kidnap an American, for the reasons we just discussed. And I still am waiting for some teeth on some policy against China and its bad behavior. We're also not hearing a lot about Cuba, by the way. Real quick before we go, your thoughts on the unrest happening in Cuba. How should the U.S. be handling this situation? Mayorkas came out the other day, the secretary, and said, don't come here. Very hard stance against these Cubans who want freedom while he's wide open borders on the southern border and allowing the Northern Triangle people to come in and flow freely.
So let me just say briefly that I'm very pleased that the Biden administration, the president, has said he wants to put democracy and human rights back at the center of our foreign policy. But he's got to really apply that principle to Iran and Cuba. These demonstrations by the people of Cuba are really stunning and really inspiring. I think they're the greatest demonstrations by the people since Castro and the communists took over Cuba in the late 50s. The people are sick of the dictatorship. They want freedom and they want economic opportunity. Incidentally, they want better health care. And we ought to do everything we can to support their cause because it's our cause, and give them a chance to side with one of our enemies 90 miles from our shore. And this communist Cuban government will do it. It's time for it to end, and it would be good for America.
Well, look, all I have to say to all of that, Joe, is talk is cheap. To quote Ray Kelly, who was on this program a couple of weeks ago, we saw the Chinese Communist Party march into Hong Kong, throw people in jail, lay down their law of this new national security law, and I have not heard a peep out of the free world on the happenings in Hong Kong. So you're going to start putting human rights abuses number one. Good. Let's see it. Talk is cheap.
Right.
Let's see it. Joe Lieberman, I love getting your insights as always. We appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.